Good evening. I'm Brett Scarpese, co-chair of the West Allis Youth Commission, and on behalf of the West Allis Youth Commission, I'd like to thank you for participating in our forum tonight. The questions you'll be asked this evening were created and will be asked by members of the Youth Commission. The forum will be moderated by co-chair Jack Rindahl and will be timed by secretaries Jorge Sanchez and Amy Lopez. You'll be given 2.5 minutes to give an opening statement, and Rebecca Bradley, or Justice Bradley, you'll go first. Following your opening statements, you will each be given 2 minutes to respond to questions asked by the commission, and you will alternate who gets to answer the question first. I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Jack.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you very much for coming. We will start our opening statement. The opening statement will be given by Justice Rebecca Bradley.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank the West Allis Youth Commission for hosting this forum and Judge Cappenberg for participating, and all of you in the audience for attending. I bring 20 years of experience in the legal and judicial professions to the state Supreme Court. Before I became a judge, I practiced law for over 16 years as a civil litigator, business transactional attorney, and arbitrator. I was also vice president of legal operations for an international software company headquartered in Waukesha County. After 16 years of legal practice, I felt called to serve the people of Wisconsin as a member of the judiciary. I felt called to judicial service because I care deeply about my community and our great state of Wisconsin. I was born and raised in the city of Milwaukee, and I have lived in Wisconsin my entire life. I became a judge because I believe it is so important that we have judges and justices who understand our duty to say what the law is and not what we may wish it to be. I believe it is so important that we have judges and justices who respect the separation of powers, who will set aside their personal policy preferences and political inclinations, and who will defer to the laws that are written by the people's elected representatives in our legislature and apply those laws as they are written, and also apply the words of our Constitution in our state and our federal Constitution as they are written. I am the first Wisconsin Supreme Court justice in state history to have served as a circuit court judge and a Court of Appeals judge. That makes me uniquely qualified to continue serving the people of Wisconsin as their Supreme Court justice. It is my honor and my privilege to serve all of you, the people of Wisconsin, on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our next statement will be by Judge Joanne Klappenberg.
Thank you very much to the Commission and all of you for paying attention to this very important race. This election is about the future of our Supreme Court. It's about what kind of court it ought to be and what kind of justices we should be electing to the court. I alone among the candidates have been to all 72 counties, and I'm struck by people's shared hopes for the court. They want a court where everyone feels like they've had a fair shake, where every justice approaches every case with an open mind, where the outcome of any case is not a foregone conclusion, in short, where we can be confident that justice is being done without fear or favor. And that's why I'm running, because I'm unwilling to surrender our court to the partisan politics and unregulated special interests that threaten to undermine its independence and integrity. The stakes are high and the choice is clear. You will see, once we've answered the questions tonight, that there is no other candidate who can match the breadth and depth of my judicial and legal experience. I was elected to the Court of Appeals in 2012. I've issued hundreds of appellate decisions in the 3.5 years since. Before that, I was an assistant attorney general at the Department of Justice for 23 years, representing the people of Wisconsin in courts around the state and arguing many times in the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. There is no other candidate who has my proven track record as an independent, impartial, thoughtful and principled appellate court decision maker. There's no other candidate who is reaching out to voters statewide to build the strong statewide campaign that's necessary to win this race. In short, you'll see that I am the only candidate who has both the background and the backbone to win this race and stand up to the partisan politics and special interests that have no place on this court. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our first question will be asked by my co-chair, Brett Scarpese, and it is for Justice Bradley. Brett?
Do you believe all lives matter?
Yes, I believe all lives matter. Is there something more specific that you're looking for in a response to that question? I want to make sure I respond fully.
Well, I'm looking for whether or not you actually believe all lives matter as it would pertain to the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the things that have been said surrounding it.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I absolutely do believe that all lives matter, but I appreciate the fact that the Black Lives Matter movement has started a very important dialogue. When I served as a children's court judge, after less than a week on that job, I noticed that the people coming before me as a children's court judge were disproportionately people of color. And I asked my colleagues why that was. I found it really disturbing, and nobody had a very good answer for that. I think the answer lies in a lot of societal issues and problems that go far beyond our criminal justice system and our court system. But I absolutely believe that that movement has started a very important dialogue in our state and in our country.
Judge Kloppenberg?
I believe that Black Lives Matter and that they have brought to the fore some serious inequalities in our society and serious issues that deserve all of our attention. I believe that the racial disparities in the criminal justice system are an issue for this race and an issue for the Supreme Court to take a leadership role in making sure that all aspects of the judicial system, the courts, the prosecution, the defense, have the resources they need to make sure that everyone believes that they're being treated fairly in our courts.
Thank you.
Our second question will be asked by Mary Pascoe, and it will be for Judge Kloppenberg first.
Do you think judiciary positions should be elected or appointed, and why?
When I ran in 2011, we had public financing, and public financing has been shown around the country to bring in newcomers to the political process, to bring in women, to bring in minorities in ways that they could not otherwise access the system. And I spoke to bar associations around the state about my experience with public financing and my research that showed that about half the states in the country appoint their justices after finding corruption in the election process. About half the states in the country elect their justices, like Wisconsin, when they became states during the populist era, after the appointment process was proven to be rife with corruption. I understand that the states that have appointments by commissions with staggered terms that are politically and geographically balanced have found that that's worked well for them. But in Wisconsin, we have elections. I do believe it's healthy for justices to go around the state and talk with people about how the court works and what it does and what their concerns are for the court. And I am making the most of the electoral process by being the only candidate who has been to every county in the state, and the only candidate who has people publicly endorsing me from every county in the state. The devil is in the inability, it seems, to regulate third-party, unregulated interests that don't have to disclose their donors. The huge amounts of money that they've injected into campaigns have taken the elections away from the voters of Wisconsin, undermine the democratic process with a little d. And I'm running to show that votes can speak more loudly than money in this race.
That's a great question. I am somebody who has been both appointed and elected by the people of Milwaukee County, so I've been through both of those processes. There are advantages and drawbacks to both an appointment process and to an elected process, and I've actually been part of sponsoring and hosting a forum in the past years about which system is better, should there be changes made in the state of Wisconsin. But our state constitution does provide for an elected judiciary, and I took an oath to defend and support the Constitution of the state of Wisconsin, and I will always defend the right of the people to select their elected representatives in every branch of government.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Our third question will be asked by Marinella Krizik, and that will be for Justice Bradley.
Hello.
Hello.
What role, if any, can the judiciary play in decreasing violence in society?
Another very great question. There is a role for the judiciary to play in decreasing violence in our society, and there's a number of ways that the judiciary can act in that regard. For example, at the trial court level, I think one of the most important jobs of trial court judges is to keep our community safe. And there's various ways for the judiciary to contribute that by having intelligent sentencing of criminals who are violent, who commit crimes against people in our society. But there's also other ways of addressing those issues of violence. And for example, I presided in children's court, so I was presiding over juvenile delinquency matters. And there are reasons that children act out violently. And I think it's really important that we treat children who commit crimes, who are adjudicated delinquent, that we find out why they're acting out in that manner and work very hard to do whatever we can to rehabilitate them while we're also keeping the community safe.
Thank you. Justice Kloppenberg?
Circuit courts in Wisconsin have led the way in providing alternatives to incarceration to make sure that offenders are held accountable, but they're also treated and rehabilitated so that they can re-enter society as productive members of our communities through diversionary courts, treatment courts, wellness courts with the tribes up north, through restorative justice and community justice efforts. And the Supreme Court can help by providing training and resources so that the circuit courts can continue to carry out those functions. Our Supreme Court recently has brought in training related to trauma so that circuit court judges can be more attuned to what is going on in the lives of the people coming before them and why they might be acting violently, and can be better able to fashion more appropriate responses to their situations. I do believe the legislature could help by providing more discretion to the circuit courts so they have greater discretion in sentencing, because they're the first line of seeing what would be most appropriate for the defendants coming before them.
Thank you very much.
All right, our next question will be asked by Zach Steiner, and Judge Kloppenberg, you may begin.
Who in history had the greatest impact on the world, and why?
I'm glad you're first.
Going back to creation, the world and our country has been so strong because it is a microcosm of all the different people in the world. And it has attracted the best and the brightest from people around the world. And we have flourished because of all the energy and the creativity and initiatives and inventiveness that people have brought to this country. And we should be celebrating what we can all do together as a community, rather than looking for one person on whose shoulders to put all of our hopes and our dreams for the world.
Thank you.
I think if I look at who's had the biggest impact on the world throughout history, it would be Jesus Christ, regardless of what religions people come from or follow. As a historical figure, as a religious figure, Jesus Christ has had the greatest impact on people over thousands of years.
Our next question will be asked by Joey DeTorres, and Justice Bradley, you may answer first.
What interest does the state have in defining marriages?
Thank you for that question. The interest that the state has in defining marriages has, I think, now come from the United States Supreme Court, which has defined for people all across the country what marriage is and who can participate in marriage. It is a debatable question. I've been hearing, as I've been meeting voters all across the state, there are many different perspectives on that very important issue, and some people believe that the government doesn't have a role in defining marriage, and other people believe otherwise. As a judge, it is my job to apply the law, and I'm bound to apply the law of the land as it has been declared by the United States Supreme Court. So my personal feelings on that issue are things that I set aside in my judicial decision-making, and I always follow the law. But I do recognize there are different perspectives on that particular issue. Good question.
The state's interest by law is in issuing marriage licenses, and people are still free to follow their own beliefs as to how they define marriage. But the U.S. Supreme Court has set the law of the land, and the states are obligated to follow that law and issue marriage licenses to people of different sexes or same sexes who apply for those licenses.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would just like to mention right now really quickly that there is also a third candidate, Judge Joe Donald, who could not make it because of another commitment. So we do have another third one. Our next question will be asked by Andrew Bunting, and Judge Klappenberg, you may answer first.
Do you believe the state government has the right to ban certain types of weapons?
The state has the right to ban certain types of weapons consistent with the Second Amendment as it has been interpreted by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Judges are in difficult positions because we get asked all the time what our positions are on various issues, and some of that's coming out in the questions that we're being asked. At the end of the day, what I believe is something that I set aside. When I have a case in front of me and I'm being called upon to apply the law to the facts, I always follow the law. That could be in the Constitution. It could be something that the United States Supreme Court has ruled on. It could be something in our own state statutes. And so how I personally feel about what the state should or shouldn't be doing is really irrelevant. I always follow the law of the land.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next question will be asked by Samantha Rasmussen, and Justice Bradley, you may answer first.
What is your view on judicial activism?
Great question. Depends on, I'm going to give you a little bit of a lawyerly response. It depends on how you define judicial activism. I do not believe it is the role of judges to impose their personal policy preferences, or where the legislature may not have acted, for the court to step in and say, well, the legislature hasn't made a pronouncement on this particular policy, so I'm going to implement a policy that I want. I think that's judicial activism. The job of a judge is, again, to look at the law, whether that's the Constitution, whether that's statutory law, or whether that's the body of case law, the common law that has developed in our state, and to apply that law. The problem we run into with judicial activism is when we have judges with kind of a different judicial philosophy, with the best of intentions usually. They want to do the right thing or the just thing as they see it. The problem with that standard is that it's a very subjective standard. And so I always follow a very objective standard when I'm applying the law. I follow the text of the law, again, whether it's statutory or constitutional or the common law, regardless of how I feel about the outcome. And for a judge to do otherwise is what I would call judicial activism.
As a litigator for 23 years, we always used to say an activist judge was a judge who ruled against you. And but being more serious about that, the law is porous. Otherwise, we wouldn't need lawyers and judges. And circuit court judges often have to exercise their discretion within the standards set and the parameters set by the law. And the job of the appellate courts, and the Supreme Court in particular, is to make sure that there were no errors of fact or law that require additional proceedings in the circuit courts. An activist judge, the concern that people have in this state is that there should be no decision seem like it is a foregone conclusion, because in their minds that's what an activist judge is, when the outcome is a foregone conclusion. And there have been some high-profile cases that have raised those concerns. The voter ID case, in which the Supreme Court added language into regulations that it found were otherwise unconstitutional, that's legislating from the bench and should be something that should be left for the legislature to do. In the Act 10 decisions, where the court seemed to be answering questions the justices wanted to answer instead of the questions that were being asked by the parties. That seems to be judicial activism. Or where you have in the recent John Doe investigation cases, where concurring justices went outside the record to base their decisions on information from publications that were issued by parties to the case, instead of confining their review to the facts and evidence that had been developed in the courts below them. That's judicial activism as well.
Thank you very much. Our next question will be asked by Nancy Sanchez, and Judge Klappenberg, you may answer first.
Hello.
Hello.
What restrictions, if any, should a public university be allowed to place on students pertaining to the exercise of their First Amendment rights?
Well, when I was in law school, I worked with the late Professor Gordon Baldwin, who was a star in Republican legal circles, but a real big First Amendment advocate. And I worked with him to design a hate speech rule for the university that was knocked down in the federal court as unconstitutional. And so you start with the Constitution and the United States and Wisconsin Supreme Court cases that define how far you can go in regulating speech. And you follow those prescriptions to see whether you can fashion a rule that respects people's sensitivities, but that also adheres to the strictures of the First Amendment. It's hard.
I think public universities, along with our high schools, are places where usually young people, but actually people of all ages, go to learn and to explore all kinds of ideas and thoughts that they've never explored before, never heard before. And I think that it's very important, especially in our public universities, that people feel free to exercise their First Amendment rights fully, because that's how people get educated, when they hear things that they've never heard before, even sometimes when those things are unpleasant or they'd rather not hear about them. And it's in the airing of all ideas, whether we think those ideas are terrible or not, that people really form their thinking and their own ideas and their own opinions. And so I fully support the exercise of First Amendment rights on our public university campuses.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Our next question will be asked by Amy Lopez, and Justice Bradley, you may answer first.
When, in your opinion, does human life begin?
My opinion of when human life begin is, again, something that I don't talk about. I don't talk about my opinions on anything related to issues that might come before the court, because what everyone is entitled to in the courts is having an impartial jurist. And so one of the most important jobs that we have as jurists is to set aside our personal feelings, our personal opinions, our political inclinations on important issues like that, because we swear oaths to support the Constitution and to apply the law fairly, impartially, and independently without respect to persons. So regardless of how I feel about that very important question, I am always bound to follow the law of the land, and I always do.
And I agree with Justice Bradley that I do not share my opinion on issues that are likely to that could become before the court, because every party does deserve a justice who has no preconceptions about the issues that they present when they go to court. And every candidate in this race has said that they will be independent and impartial as a justice on the court. And the challenge for voters statewide is to determine which candidate is most likely to deliver on that promise to be independent and impartial. And in order to do that, the voters need to look at how each of the candidates got to where we are today.
Thank you.
All right, our next question will be asked by Matt Miles, and Judge Klappenberg, you may answer first.
In your personal opinion, should under God be removed from the Pledge of Allegiance?
Again, my personal opinion is not something I would share in this particular issue, because it raises legal issues. It is the law of the land that under God is in the Pledge of Allegiance, and if it is to be changed, that's something for the legislature to do as the representative body for Congress to do as the representative body for the people of the United States.
Okay, thank you. Judge Bradley?
Justice.
I agree with Judge Klappenberg as well. That is a very important issue that should be decided by the people. And it would be decided by the people through their elected representatives in the legislature. And that's an issue, again, that could come before the courts. And then it's the job of the justices, if that issue would come before the court, to make a determination if there's a legal challenge raised to that. And so, again, we don't and wouldn't share our personal opinions about that, because we'd be prejudging the matter, and then we'd actually not be able to sit on that type of a case and hear that case, because we would have made a public pronouncement about what we think about it, and therefore would have prejudged the matter. So that's an issue that would be left to the people to decide.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next question will be asked by Kristen Kirchner, and Justice Bradley, you may answer first.
Good evening.
Good evening.
In your opinion, who is the most influential United States president?
Most influential United States president. Usually when I get questions like that, I would have a list of 5. But in the spirit of President Lincoln's birthday, I will choose President Lincoln. He had a profound impact on our country and maintaining a unified country, and also had a obviously tremendous influence in ending slavery in our country. So he had a remarkable impact on many people, and his words are frequently cited by people in so many contexts for what he did for our country.
Thank you. Justice Klappenberg?
Any president that you might name would highlight how internally complex every person is. President Lincoln had slaves, and yet he led this country in emancipating black people from slavery. We had George Washington, who created this country but also had slaves. We had Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who made such inroads in helping the middle class and the working people realize the promise of the United States earlier in last century, and yet there were things that he did that people found objectionable. I would go back to the kind of answers I've been giving earlier, that we are strong as a nation because of all of the different contributions that all of us have made, and there's no one person who can make or break our country.
Thank you.
Our next question will be asked by my co-chair, Brett Scarpese, and Judge Klappenberg, you may answer first.
What are your views on the Supreme Court, on the United States Supreme Court's rulings on the Second Amendment in cases such as D.C. versus Heller and McDonald versus Chicago?
I follow those rulings.
I have to agree with Judge Klappenberg. Again, we are bound as state court judges to follow the law of the land, which includes the United States Supreme Court decisions, regardless of how we feel about those decisions.
Thank you.
Our next question will be asked by Courtney Hall, and Justice Bradley, you may answer first.
Hello.
Hello.
What is your understanding of the difference between a liberal, socialist, and a conservative?
That's a good question. People define those differently. I'm speaking from the perspective of being a judge, but traditionally a conservative, I would say, is somebody who believes in limited government, free markets, and individual responsibility. Libertarians today, I think, fall under the parameters of being more economic conservatives and social liberals. They generally, and again, I really hate to speak for large groups of people, but libertarians believe that the government should stay out of a lot of personal decisions and social policy issues, and tend to be more free market oriented. And liberals, I think, believe that the government should have a larger role in various issues that are presented to our society.
Thank you. Justice Koppenberg?
Judge. Those labels have been turned on their heads by the presidential campaign this year. And people like to throw around labels, especially in judicial races where we're nonpartisan, and people don't know how to label us because we are all nonpartisan, running for nonpartisan positions. And what's more important than the labels is, again, how we got to where we are today, and our focus on the work of the court. Are the decisions of the court well-reasoned? Do they adhere to the record in the cases? Do they adhere to the law? Are they principled, thoughtful analyses that are easy for people to follow and easy for people to understand? As the only candidate with over 3.5 years of Court of Appeals decisions issued in all different areas of law, you could not look at any one of those decisions and say, well, this was written by a conservative or a libertarian or a liberal. The whole point of judicial decision-making is to eschew those labels and to go where the facts and the law take the judicial decision-makers.
Thank you.
Our next question will be asked by Helena Lassiter, and Judge Klappenberg, you may answer first.
Hello.
Hello.
Do you have an opinion on lowering the Wisconsin voting age?
On
the Wisconsin voting age?
Oh, lowering the Wisconsin voting age. I do not have an opinion on lowering the Wisconsin voting age. I am glad that people as young as 18 can vote in this state. My youngest daughter voted in her very first election when I was running for the Court of Appeals judge. And that would be, again, an issue for our elected representatives to take up based on the input that they're getting from people around the state. And if it's up to them to determine, based on what their constituents are telling them, what the appropriate voting age in Wisconsin is.
I agree with Judge Kloppenberg. That's another type of policy issue that is best left to the people and to their elected representatives in the legislature. Right now, we have an 18-year-old voting age, and I think it's important that if we have young people at the age of 18 going to war for us, that they have the right to vote. But as far as lowering that age, I leave that to the policy judgments of the people through their elected representatives.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next question will be asked by Charles Reingard, and Justice Bradley, you may answer first. Charles.
Hi, Judge.
Hello.
What privacy or any other constitutional concerns do you have expanding the use of police body cameras?
I feel like our responses are probably very unsatisfying to you tonight, because that's another one of those that I put in the bucket of a policy decision that is best left to the people through their elected representatives to determine. And that's exactly the type of issue that I think is kind of emerging as a very important one. And I think we're going to see a lot of that type of issue running through both the federal and the state court system. Having said that, that means that's the type of an issue that could come before Judge Kloppenberg on the Court of Appeals, or could come before me on the Supreme Court. So in looking at making a decision on an issue like that, I would certainly examine the Constitution and start with the Constitution and let that inform my judicial decision making. But that's a type of issue that we do not prejudge. We wait until we hear all sides of that issue and look at the facts before us and make a determination following the law.
And I agree with Justice Bradley that could, in addition to being a matter to be discussed by communities around the country, it raises implications for Fourth Amendment law and other issues of constitutional law that could well come before the federal courts and the state courts, and it's best for both of us to stay mum.
Thank you.
Our next question will be asked by Javier Lopez, and Judge Kloppenberg, you may answer first.
What are your thoughts on the balance between one's personal liberty and the society's desire to be secure?
Again, these are really wonderful questions to be discussing in courses of philosophy and political science and sociology, but they all are, in the end, policy. They start as policy determinations that are made by elected legislators throughout the country in determining what works best for the different communities throughout our country. But then they wind their way through to legal issues that implicate the constitutional rights and protections that are in both our federal and our state constitution, and that courts will be called on to address. And therefore, I am not free to share any opinions I might have on the question that you've asked.
I have to agree with Judge Kloppenberg again. This is exactly the type of important issue that I could very well see coming before the Supreme Court under various fact scenarios. And I would always start with the Constitution in evaluating issues like that. But again, I would absolutely maintain an open mind and hear the arguments through briefing and oral arguments that would be presented to by the parties in a case on both sides of the issue, and I would look at the law and follow the law absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next question will be asked by Stephanie Danner, and Justice Bradley, you may answer first.
What are your thoughts on the current state of the juvenile justice system, especially Milwaukee County?
That's a great question, near and dear to my heart. I spent 2.5 years serving in children's court, where I heard cases involving termination of parental rights, children in need of protection or services, and juvenile delinquency. And it was a very eye-opening experience for me to serve in children's court. I was amazed at the volume of need in our community. I'm from Milwaukee. I live about 2 miles from this hotel. And to give you an idea of the scale of need, I was one of 8 judges who handled approximately 700 to 800 cases every year. We have in Milwaukee County 2 judges who on a full-time basis hear nothing but termination of parental rights. But I really applaud the people who dedicate themselves to children's court, to serving as guardians ad litem for our children, who work in the DA's office and the state public defender's office, people who have been working for, some of them for decades, dealing with these extremely emotional and difficult issues. I was so impressed by the quality of work that is performed there, not only by attorneys, but by social workers, by our law enforcement officers. But there is overwhelming need there. Is the system perfect? No, but there's a lot of wonderful people who dedicate themselves to, as I did when I was there, strengthening families, keeping the community safe, and protecting our children. Are there improvements to be made? Absolutely. We've seen definitely a spike in juvenile delinquency and some pretty serious and violent crimes occurring in our community. The system sometimes can get a bit overwhelmed by the volume of need in the system. There's also issues, I could go on and on, but I've got 30 seconds left. There's also issues, as you may have been reading about in the newspaper, about Lincoln Hills, which is the secure facility for juveniles who need to be securely detained based on the nature of the crimes they've committed and the danger that they pose to the community. So I think there's an initiative now underway in Milwaukee County to move children out of Lincoln Hills and find secure detention centers more locally based.
There are a lot of players in the juvenile justice system, and often the results are reached collaboratively by all the different players, with the judge sitting there exercising the final discretion within the parameters of the law, but basing the exercise of that discretion on the input from all of the different players, the social workers, the guardians ad litem, the attorneys for the parents and the children, the victims, all of the people who have something to say about what that juvenile need, what that child needs, and what resources there are available to address those needs. And there's no question that we need more local opportunities, more local alternatives to Lincoln Hills, where it is easier for families to stay intact as juveniles work through the different treatments and programs that I hope we can increasingly make available to satisfy the needs out there.
Thank you. Our next question will be asked by Joey DeTorres, and Judge Clappenberg, you may answer first.
What book are you reading, or have you read most recently?
The book I've read most recently is For the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki.
I'd like to hear more about that. I haven't heard of that one. But I won't put you on the spot. I can't ask questions. I'll be really honest with you. I've been so busy doing my relatively new job as a state Supreme Court justice, and like Judge Kloppenberg, traveling around the state to get my message out to the people. But the one book that I do read or try to read on a daily basis is the Bible, because there's a lot of wonderful inspirational messages that helped me keep a really good perspective on everything that's going on in my life and what's really important in life.
Thank you. Our next question will be asked by Jack Kovinsky, and Justice Bradley, you may answer first.
Hello.
Hello.
What constitutes a religion entitled to the free exercise thereof?
You guys come up with the best questions. I'm really impressed, I have to say that. That's another type of question that is, we're not really able to respond to that because that's the type of issue that could very well come before us. I'm really impressed by your questions because you obviously are focused on what are the important issues today that are really emerging in the legal system, and that's why that's exactly the type of question that could come before us and the type of, I think, constitutional issue that could especially come before the appellate courts in Wisconsin as we're seeing that type of issue emerge over and over again. And so, like the other issues that have been mentioned, I would look at the arguments in the briefs and listen to the oral arguments and make a decision in accordance with our state and federal constitutions and in accordance with the law always.
And I agree with Justice Bradley that the question is very provocative and worth a great deal of discussion, but ultimately it implicates legal issues and constitutional principles that may come before the court, and it would not be proper for us to offer our opinions on those issues.
Thank you.
Our next question will be asked by Nancy Sanchez, and Judge Clappenberg, you may answer first.
Which high school teacher had the greatest impact in your life?
High school was a long time ago for me. I would have to say that the teacher who had the greatest impact on my life was my 6th grade teacher, because he pulled me aside in October of my 6th grade year and moved me up to 7th grade and said that I needed to move on, and I'm so grateful that he did because it opened up a whole new world for me.
You're really putting me on the spot here because I attended Divine Savior Holy Angels, and I know this is being recorded, and my high school teachers might actually watch it, but I will answer it. The high school teacher who had the greatest impact on me was my English teacher, one of my English teachers at DSHA. It was Mr. Grandy. And I loved to write, and I was a really good writer, and I think I still am a really good writer. But Mr. Grandy, no matter what I wrote or how much effort I put into my papers, I got B's. And I never got B's on my papers. So I finally went to him one day and I said, what do I have to do to get an A? And he said, oh, all of your papers are worthy of an A. And I said, well, why are you giving me B's? And he said, because I'm trying to push you to do even better because you are a great writer. And I said, well, you're kind of messing up my GPA for college purposes. But from then on out, I think I got the grade I actually thought I deserved most of the time, an A. So he had a big influence on me that way.
Thank you.
All right, our next question will be asked by Karen Cord, and Justice Bradley, you may answer first.
Hi. Who is your favorite Supreme Court justice of all time?
Oh, wow. These all-time questions.
That's another one. You know, I could give you my top 5 or even my top 10. Wow. I'm going to actually go with one of our current justices. And this is an answer that I've been giving to the media when they've been asking us this question. And the response that I give is Justice Clarence Thomas. And usually the question is phrased as, who do you most admire? Well, Justice Thomas had an amazingly impoverished upbringing. He was raised first by a single mom, who then realized that she was not capable of providing for him and for his sibling in the way that she wanted to. And so she had their grandfather and grandmother raise them, and he overcame unbelievable poverty and racism in the Deep South when he was growing up to go all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And so I admire him for being able to overcome those extremely tough personal circumstances growing up. I also admire him for his style of writing and the intelligence that he displays in his writings. One of the things that I strive to do as an appellate judge on the Wisconsin Supreme Court is to write opinions that are clear and succinct and understandable by even people outside of the legal profession, because at the end of the day, the opinions that we write affect all of you. They affect all of the people in the state of Wisconsin. And so I admire his style of writing because I think he writes with great clarity and in a straightforward manner that is understandable to anyone reading his opinions, and that's something that I strive for as well.
I'll give you the answer I've given to the media when they've asked this question. Is that, and it's often framed in what justices are you closest to philosophically? And I answer first Justices Sotomayor and Ginsburg, because they are trailblazers for women who want to follow their footsteps as judges and lawyers. And even as they have overcome hardships, as they have blazed those trails, they have maintained their generosity of spirit. They also appear to share my view of the Constitution as protecting individual rights and promoting a more equal society. I also mention Justice Kennedy because I admire his and I respect his ability to form coalitions on the court, which is so important for our national and state jurisprudence.
Thank you.
Our next question will be asked by Matt Miles, and Judge Klappenberg, you may answer first.
When you chose to pursue a career in the law, what was your second choice?
Well, I was a Russian studies major as an undergraduate, and I wanted to be an ambassador. I went on to get my graduate degree in public affairs and administration. It was in the mid-'70s when everybody was talking about nuclear war, and I really wanted to talk more about people, and I switched into development, and then I went into the Peace Corps for 3 years and planned and obtained international financing for rural development projects around the country in Botswana. I could have stayed in development, but I returned to the States because as an expatriate, I had to keep myself emotionally removed from the politics and the policies in the country in which I was working, and I wanted to be able to speak my mind about what I thought, even though we can't speak our minds now as judges, but I wanted to be able to speak my mind about what I believed was going on in my country and should go on in my country. And I returned to the States and started the nutrition program for women, infants, and children in 2 poor rural counties before moving to Madison and going to law school with 2 of my 3 children. I chose the law because I value its power and its potential to be a force for positive change. And I chose to work at the Department of Justice as an Assistant Attorney General, representing the interests of all of the people of Wisconsin in courts around the state, because I sought the opportunity to work on cases that would have direct and positive impacts on all of our lives.
Thank you.
Well, my family will tell you that I was probably destined for a career in the law because I liked to argue so much, especially with my older brother when we were growing up. But I developed a really deep interest and love for the law and government and policy that I think from the age of 16, might be a lot of your ages right now, I was set on going to law school. I ended up majoring in economics and business administration as an undergrad at Marquette University because my dad said, well, if you decide not to go to law school, it might be a good idea for you to have a degree where you could actually, find a job. We were kind of in a recessionary time when I was in college. And I actually really found that I enjoyed economics very much. But as far as a second choice career, I imagine I might have ended up in the teaching profession because I come from a long line of teachers going back to my grandmother and several aunts and uncles. My brother teaches high school government and U.S. history, and my oldest niece and nephew have now chosen teaching as their career. So teaching is definitely in my blood, but from teenage years on, I was set on being a lawyer and really wanted to be in court, and that's why I chose litigation for my career until I felt called to be a member of the judiciary. And I have to tell you, I think I've got the best job in the world. I love my job, and it is such an honor and a privilege to be able to serve as a justice on the Supreme Court.
This next question will be asked by Brianna Wood. And Justice Bradley, you may answer first.
What was the most important day in your life?
Wow, these are really difficult questions. The most important day in my life, that's a tough one. One of my most memorable days in my life was when I was sworn into the bar. I was the first attorney in my immediate family, certainly, but also in my extended family. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I can't find any other attorney in a long line of my family on both sides. And I remember going to the Wisconsin Supreme Court hearing room, where I now have the privilege of sitting as a justice, and being sworn in as a member of the bar. And I was so incredibly proud. I had just lost my father, so it was a really sad day for me because he wasn't there, but the rest of my family was there, and I was so excited to begin my career in the law as an attorney, and so proud, and I felt so privileged to have had the educational opportunities that led me down that path to be able to become a lawyer in the state of Wisconsin. So that's the first thing that came to my mind of a few other very memorable days in my life. That's a great question.
Life is not black and white, and I've been very fortunate to have many wonderful and important days. From the day I alluded to before, where I was told I would be skipping a grade, to the day I got married, to the day my husband and I, which was the next day after we got married, when we left in a plane for Botswana to join Peace Corps, to the days that my children were born, to the day that I was sworn in, having been elected to the Court of Appeals. I'm the only candidate who was first elected to the bench and not appointed. When my father put my robe on me, my mother had died of Alzheimer's about 2 months earlier, and my father came out for the investiture and put my robe around my shoulders, and that just brought all the world into focus for me of what's really, really important and what really matters.
Thank you.
Our next question will be asked by Brett Scarpese, and I'm sorry, and
I think I'm up.
Sorry, and Judge Klappenberg, you may answer. Sorry, I lost my track.
That's okay.
What specifically makes you more qualified than your opponents to be on the state Supreme Court?
I am head and shoulders more qualified than the other candidates in this race. I am the only candidate with a proven track record of being an independent, impartial, thoughtful, and principled appellate court decision maker. I was elected to the Court of Appeals in 2012. I am now the presiding judge, having been chosen by my colleagues to be the presiding judge in my district. I have issued hundreds of appellate court decisions in all different areas of law. Before that, I was an assistant attorney general at the Department of Justice for 23 years, litigating and prosecuting cases in all different areas of law and supervising attorneys who practice both criminal and civil law in circuit courts around the state. I argued many, many times in the Court of Appeals, argued many times in the Supreme Court, and did the same at all levels of the federal district courts. I had one of the longest civil trials in the history of DOJ in Fond du Lac, protecting the community's drinking water supply. And I also have the richest life experience, having gone to Peace Corps, having had so many different jobs before I decided to go to law school, going to law school, teaching legal writing at law school, interning for Justice Shirley Abrahamson, graduating with honors and awards, clerking for Chief Judge Barbara Crabb at the federal court before I joined the Department of Justice. I have been teaching at the University of Wisconsin Law School since 1990. I have volunteered extensively in my community and my legal profession. I'm a mentor for law students and for new lawyers. I have been a volunteer lawyer and a volunteer mediator in different areas of law other than those in which I've practiced.
Thank you.
I am the most qualified candidate in this race because I am serving as your Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice. I'm the only candidate who has experience on the Supreme Court. I'm also the first Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice in state history to have served at every level of the court system as a circuit court judge, which is the trial court level where I handled hundreds of cases every year. I was also a Court of Appeals judge where I handled dozens of cases during my time on that court, and now I am serving on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Before I was a judge, I was a practicing lawyer for over 16 years, handling complex civil litigation matters. I also served in a quasi-judicial role as an arbitrator. Arbitration is an alternative to the traditional court system. So I had experience before I even became an elected judge in Wisconsin as an arbitrator making decisions in civil litigation cases. I'm the only candidate who actually served in a business role. I was vice president of legal operations for a growing software company in the state of Wisconsin. And one of the most important jobs of a Supreme Court justice is to make decisions in extremely complex areas of the law. I've been a judge handling cases in all areas of the law. And my complex civil litigation experience when I was a practicing attorney prepared me very well for handling the types of issues, the very difficult and challenging issues that come before the Supreme Court. So I bring 20 years of experience in the legal and judicial profession that make me very uniquely qualified to continue serving as a Supreme Court justice. I also think that I bring a unique and important judicial philosophy to the court of applying the law as it is written by the elected representatives in our state legislature and as it is written in the Constitution. I believe very strongly that it is my job to say what the law is and not what I may wish it to be. For all of those reasons, I am the best qualified to continue serving as Supreme Court Justice.
Thank you.
Thank you very much once again. Our next question will be asked by Courtney Hall, and Justice Bradley, you may answer first.
If you could be any superhero for a day, which one would it be and why?
I love these questions. These are great. I have to say Superman, because one of the things that I wanted to do from little on was to learn to fly. And I actually looked at flight manuals to figure out if this was something that I could do, learn how to fly, but I have terrible eyesight, so I don't know that I could ever become a pilot. So I guess I'll pick Superman so that I would have the ability to fly.
Thank you.
I've been called a super mom by my kids, but I would choose a superhero who hasn't been chosen yet, someone who could relieve people of their mental illnesses and other impediments that prevent them from realizing their full potential.
Thank you.
Very sorry, 1 second. Our next question will be asked by Javier Lopez, and Judge Clappenberg, you may answer first.
So where in the world that you have not been would you care to travel to?
Well, I've been a lot of places in the world, from living in Norway, living in the Soviet Union, living in Botswana for 3 years, and traveling after returning from Peace Corps, going to visit our children as they have traveled and served in Peace Corps around the country in Latin America and New Zealand. And I like best canoeing in Wisconsin, and I would always choose to be going down one of the forks of the Flambeau in the summer would be my ideal place to travel.
I have had the privilege of being able to travel to a number of areas of the world, including Africa and Asia and Europe. But in October, I was actually supposed to go on a mission trip to South America to spend some time with orphans, and I wasn't able to go because I got appointed to the Supreme Court. So that is a place that I am planning to go when I have the time to do it.
Thank you.
Our next question will be asked by Zach Steiner, and Justice Bradley, you may answer first.
What is your favorite movie?
Favorite movie? It's like, how do I even begin to choose among that? Since it was just recently Christmas, I'm going to go with the first movie that popped into mind. One of my favorite movies is It's a Wonderful Life. Have you seen it?
No.
I have to see a show of hands. Who's seen It's a Wonderful Life? The reason I'm asking you is because when I was in high school, I had seen this movie when I was growing up. We watched it every year at Christmas time. But in one of my classes in high school, our teacher asked who had seen it. And I was like the only kid in the class who had seen it, so he had us watch it. And the reason that's one of my favorite movies is because it teaches that sometimes we think life is not going very well and woe is me. There's all these horrible things going on, and we kind of lose sight of how really blessed we are. And I love that movie. I watch it every Christmas because it is a reminder that it really is a wonderful life. I have a wonderful life, and I've been so incredibly blessed. So I love that movie for that reason.
Even better than movies, I like live theater because I like being really close to the performers and seeing them transform before my eyes into characters into which they breathe incredible life. And it's an immersive experience that is so much more direct for me than movies, and I take something new out of every play and musical I have seen live, and the impressions stay with me much longer than any movie has.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we'll be moving on to our final question. Will be asked by Katie Tour and Judge Claflin. You may ask. Yeah, Judge Claflin. Sorry, very sorry.
That's okay.
Judge Claflin-Berg, you may answer first.
Okay.
There we go.
I got it.
I
will.
I got it that time. All right. Katie Tour.
Hello.
Hello.
Is the U.S. Constitution a living document that adapts, or does it mean today exactly what it meant when it was written?
It couldn't possibly mean today what it meant when it was written, when slaves were 2/3 of people and women weren't given all of the rights that men were given. It is an evolving document, just like our society is evolving, and it has served us so well. And it is a sacred document that, as is our Wisconsin Constitution, a sacred document that shouldn't be amended lightly. And we should, all of us who are lawyers and judges and justices, look to both constitutions as the starting point and ending point of how we decide the cases that come before us.
Another great question. The U.S. Constitution lives through the process of amendment. It cannot be that the majority of justices who sit on our U.S. Supreme Court at any given point in time get to decide what the Constitution means based on what they would like it to mean. And this goes back to the judicial philosophy that I have talked about from the beginning of this forum. It is our job as judges and justices to say what the law is and not what we want it to be. And if the people in the United States want to change the Constitution, that's their prerogative. It is by design difficult to do, but our Constitution has been amended throughout the history of our country, and that is how the Constitution lives. It cannot live in the opinions, the personal subjective opinions of a majority of justices, because then we have no written Constitution.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And now we will have 2.5 minutes for your closing statements. Judge Cappenberg, you may begin.
All right. I had said at the start that the stakes are high and the choice is clear. We have a tremendous opportunity in this election to choose a new justice for our Supreme Court and to make sure that the court works for all of us in Wisconsin. We have an opportunity to choose a justice who we are confident will approach every case with an open mind and who will stand up to the partisan politics and special interests that undermine people's respect for the court and the authority of the court. As an advocate at the Department of Justice, I was very expansive and in my arguments, and I was very successful as a result. I have learned through my almost 3.5 to 4 years as a judge on the Court of Appeals that you have to be much more focused and disciplined in your analysis and your thinking and much more careful in your language so that you issue decisions that are as narrow as they need to be and as restrained as they need to be to resolve the disputes that come before you. I am the only candidate that people can count on to stand up to partisan politics and special interests that have no place on our court, because I'm the only candidate that has done that consistently throughout my career and throughout this campaign. I would be so honored to earn the votes of those of you who are old enough to vote in this election that comes, and I thank you for the opportunity for speaking to you tonight.
Thank you. Justice Bradley.
Thank you. I have to start out by saying I'm so impressed by the quality and the insight shown in your questions. You obviously put a lot of time into this forum, and I really appreciate the time that you put into it and your intelligent questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this forum. I'm going to conclude by telling you a story from my experience as a circuit court judge back in children's court. As I mentioned, I handled really emotional and difficult cases involving issues like whether to terminate parents' rights to their own children, whether parents would be able to even see or speak to their children. And I got to know the families who would appear in front of me, the children and the parents whose cases I was deciding. And as I got to know them, as a human being, I would develop my own personal feelings about what I would like to see happen in the case. But in order to make sure that I did not let my personal feelings interfere with my judicial decision-making, I always looked to the law that I was called upon to apply. And I would apply that law to the facts presented to me in each and every case. And that way, I ensured that my personal feelings would not affect my judicial decision-making. I give you that by way of example because that's how I approach each and every case, regardless of the subject matter in front of me. I always look to the law that I'm called upon to apply, whether I like the outcome in a particular decision or not. That's the judicial philosophy that I bring to the Supreme Court. I also bring 20 years of experience in the legal and judicial professions, and I think the experience that I had as a circuit court judge handling hundreds of cases, and then as a Court of Appeals judge handling many cases in all areas of the law, is extremely important experience that I bring to the Supreme Court. I also bring a very collegial and easygoing and friendly manner to the court. It's very important that all of the justices can get along in a professional and collegial manner, and I know that I have brought that to the court over the last several months that I've been serving as a Supreme Court Justice. It really is my honor and privilege to serve the people of Wisconsin on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and I hope to earn the support of the voters of Wisconsin so that I can continue my calling on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Thank you again for putting on this excellent forum tonight.
Thank you.